Hello, everybody, and welcome to another hand review. Today, we're going to look at two extremely interesting hands played by James Obst in the late stages of the 2016 WSOP Main Event. In each of these hands, Obst mixed a huge hand on the river, yet something doesn't feel quite right. In his first hand, Obst is cruising towards every poker player's dream, the WSOP final table. He's one of the most accomplished players left in the tournament, and he's got about double the average stack of the remaining players. But as we know, poker gods can be cruel. Without further ado, let's get into the action and see what happens. So in this first hand, Fernando Pons opens from under the gun with king-queen suited. Michael Ruane flats on the button with 9-8 suited. And Obst calls in the small blind with pocket sevens, after which Ngyuen completes in the big blind with 9-6 offsuit.
And the local with a taste for baccarat with 9-6.
And Ngyuen still wearing that hat. A friend needs to set up an intervention.
All right, Nguyen with great pot odds for him. Does call four-way flop now. And the flop is queen seven. Jack Obst comes up big with a set of sevens. Ruane picks up a straight flush draw. The table chip leader Obst checks and Nguyen checks.
Pons flops top pair, big kicker. He's going to bet, and he's 4%.
With the pair of queens, does bet 625. Ruane putting some big chips together. And that is a raise to $2,025,000.
Well, I think Obst has exactly what he wants. But remember, Pons raised under the gun pre-flop, so it's possible he could have pocket queens or jacks, and then this would be a set over set situation.
Obst with the set of seven.
5.3.
Wants to re-raise to 5.3 million. Get out of my pot. Nguyen folds. Pons does get out of the way. Back to Ruane now.
Who's thinking, oops, I might be in big trouble. He could be facing a set or even an ace-high flush draw here.
Pot's already almost 10 million. Both of these gentlemen started the hand with more than 22 million in front of them, and there's a call from Ruane.
No give up in Michael Ruane right now.
They head to the flop of queen jack 7 with two clubs, which Ruane has, and it checks over to Pons, who c-bets 625K. Now Michael Ruane, with his gut shot and flush draw, decides to raise to just over 2 million. I like this raise. He can clear out some stronger flush draws. Not many stronger flush draws, but like a king-high flush draw potentially can fold behind him. Also, if somebody behind him has a hand like king-queen, ace-queen, they're certainly going to be folding this raise. And if Fernando Pons was just c-betting ace-10 offsuit, Ruane's going to take down the pot right now. He also has position, and they are very deep. The average stack at this point was around 13 million. And as you can see, these three players are all hovering around 20 million or so. Now, James Obst finds himself in a weird spot once it goes bet raise and you have bottom set. The value hands that Ruane is repping are queen jack, queen queen, and jack jack. But a lot of queen queen and jack jack hands would have 3-bet preflop. So if I'm James Obst, I'm thinking I probably have the best hand here. This is a draw heavy board. I'd like to either take the pot down now with the raise or stack a hand like queen jack, which is exactly what I think Obst was thinking because he decides to raise to 5.3 million. Pons gets out of the way with his king-queen, very standard fold here against this much heat, and Ruane calls.
My goodness. Turn card now. What a pot we've got going. Is the 10 of clubs, Ruane with the straight flush. I don't remember the last time we saw a straight flush, Norman.
I'm sorry, Lon. That card seems beyond the realm of realistic human possibility.
It's so exciting. Obst checked it.
Obst does know it was very possible Ruane was on a flush draw.
And now Michael Ruane with the nuts of the nuts. Doesn't slow play at a bet of 3.75 million.
The pot is swelling. Obst has got to call and hope the board pairs.
Well, he still loses if the board pairs.
He doesn't know that. We can see all the hole cards. They can't.
Oh, okay. Obst has to have concerns about that board, but the bet was so small from Ruane, and he still has possibilities in his mind. He makes the call.
Off rolls the 10 of clubs turn, and Ruane turns a straight flush. James Obst with his set is drawing dead, but it's hard for him to know that. James decides to check, and I like this check. Most likely either up against a draw, a rare queen-queen or jack-jack, or a hand like queen-jack. Now the draw could be king 10 offsuit, although a lot of king 10 offsuit hands fold pre-flop or 3-bet. It could be king 10 of a different suit like spades, but more often than not, it's a combo draw like Ruane has, and it has turned a flush. So there's not a lot of value to get, and you don't want to bloat the pot unnecessarily. So I like James's check. Ruane, with the super nuts, decides to bet 3.75 million into a pot of around 13 million. I like this sizing. Keep in 2-pair and sets like James has here, because you want those hands to draw at a full house. I mean, they might be good, but also they can draw and potentially make a full house, which would be a disaster for them, and you get to stack them. So far, so good. I like the check. I like the bet. And James Obst calls, as I would too.
And he still has possibilities in his mind. He makes the call.
We don't see that many straight flushes. What a time for Michael Ruane to turn one.
And the river card, another 10 Obst, improves to that full house, but it's useless.
That is cruel and unusual punishment for James Obst. I don't know if he can take any legal action here, but I would defend him.
4.7.
Obst is going to try to get value for what he thinks is the best hand, 4.7 million.
Yeah, he bets just less than quarter of the pot. And if Obst somehow can get away from this hand after Ruane raises, he just saved himself some chips.
To Michael Ruane. He raises all in.
Look at the size of this pot. If Obst calls here, he'll be left with less than 20 big blinds.
And what do you know? James makes his full house on an offsuit 10 river, and he takes an interesting line here. There is 21 million in the pot. There's only 12.5 million effective in stacks. If I were in Obst's shoes here, I would just open shove, most likely. It looks like you have queen jack or a set of sevens, most likely, or some kind of like ace 10 bluff with the ace of clubs. Jamming, getting called by a flush makes a lot of sense. You could have some bluffs, you could have some value, and there's less than, 70% pot remaining. But instead, Obst decides to fire out a small bet. He bets 4.7 million into this $20 million pot. Ruane's decision is going to be easy. He has the nuts, and he needs to shove the money in.
This is a life-changing cooler in progress. Considering the stage of the main event we're at, this reminds me of the Jonathan Duhamel Matt Affleck pot in 2010 that propelled Duhamel to the title and sent Matt home. I will say this, if you're Obst with sevens full and Ruane has shoved all in, what can he have? He might have you beat.
So it looks like he has a straight flush. Could be the best actor of all time.
So I know many of you are thinking, just call. You have a full house, and it's a really good hand. There's 38 million in the pot. You only have to call another 8 million or so. Let's just see what he has. But Obst thinks differently. Now, James Obst is an excellent player. I've played against him for many, many years online, really creative as well. And so he's somebody who's not afraid to make a huge fold or a huge bluff or a huge call based on both his gut and his read of the situation. So I can't speak to what his gut is telling him here. I can't speak to what physical tells he may have picked up or what he knows about his opponent, but I can speak to the hand reading of the situation. So if we go back to the flop, Michael Ruane, we figured that he had some kind of draw or queen jack or queen queen or jack jack, less likely. Now on the turn, on the 10 of clubs, I don't think he's likely to bet a hand like queen queen or jack jack. It's possible, but I think less likely. Similarly, queen jack, I think somewhat unlikely as well. So I think on the turn, you're up against a hand like king 10 of spades that is bluffing, or potentially a flush of some kind, which seems, very likely. Which is why if I were Obst, I would just open shove the river, thinking that my opponent has a flush, like almost always. When you bet into your opponent, saying that you have a full house, the Obst is saying, I either have a nut flush that was playing tricky on the turn and I don't want a king high flush to check back, or I made a full house and I played it like pocket sevens because I have pocket sevens. Potentially queen jack as a bluff. Now, Ruane shoves. So he is saying that for value, he has a hand better than pocket sevens. Ruane's a competent player, so Obst only beats a bluff here. Some players might get into this spot with a king high flush or an ace high flush and think they're good and just shove because of the small bet size. But I think both of them know what's going on here. And the big question that Obst needs to ask himself, what is Ruane bluffing with here? Sometimes finding the card combinations to bluff with can be really tricky. Now, in certain situations, like you have the ace of clubs blocker on a flush board, it's very common to bluff. Other spots, the pot is kind of smaller, you've missed your draw, it's easy to find the bluff. In these very nuanced spots where 3 bets go in on the flop, a small bet goes in on the turn, Ruane is left with a range that is very specific. And so in order to bluff enough, he needs to bluff with some very specific hands. Usually to bluff here, people would want a queen blocker or a jack blocker to represent an overfull, maybe a 10 blocker. He's not going to have those hands, the rare exception being queen jack that decided to bet the turn, which I think is pretty unlikely. So if he's going to bluff, he needs to bluff with a flush that was value betting on the turn, which I think is very unlikely, or king 10. Now the 10 of diamonds hit on the river, the 10 of clubs is out on the turn, so there are only 2 combos of king 10 of spades and king 10 of hearts. And Obst needs to reduce the probability of each of these by considering how often is Ruane going to raise the flop rather than call the flop with these hands, how often is he going to bet the turn without a club if he has king 10 of hearts or king 10 of spades as a bluff, and then does he make this play? Now, it may sound like there are very few potential bluffs for Ruane to have, and that's because there are. But on the other side of the coin, it's the fact that he's representing 9-8 of clubs. That's exactly one combo. And yes, it may have played this way very often on all the streets, but it's just one combo. It's so rare to be dealt specifically, well, any one specific combo of hand. There are a few combos that Obst can beat. There is one combo that I believe he's deduced he can lose to, which is 9-8 of clubs. Yes, the rare queen, jack, jack, potentially. Even though there are more combos on the potential bluff side, I think Obst just feels that he is beat here. That's how I would analyze it. I would have already been all in because I would have open shoved. Let's see how Obst navigates this very, very difficult spot.
Wow, what a laydown. Ruane will collect that mountain of chips.
A big laydown. And now we have a new big stack.
So James Obst calls the exact hand that his opponent has. This is an incredible fold regardless, but keep in mind too, I mean, he's got 1,000,000 to 1 odds. So he has to be really, really confident that his opponent has this one combination. I mean, I've always known that Obst is a brilliant, brilliant mind and poker player, but this one is really above the rim. But does he always get it right? Does he always make the right folds and right calls? Not necessarily. In this next hand, we're down to just 14 players. Ngyuen raises to 950,000 from early position, and Ruzicka flats on the button. He folds to James in the big blind, and he makes the call off of a stack of about 8.5 million, which is 21 big blinds. They head to the flop of queen 10-6 with 2 spades. Nguyen has the ace of spades. It checks to him, and he decides to check here. I think that this is probably a plus EV check in practice. Having the ace of spades blocker makes it a decent bluffing hand, but his board is so connected that you really have to kind of raise the bar on your threshold of quality semi-bluffs or bluffs. So I do like his check with ace of spades 5 here. Ruzicka checks as well with ace jack of diamonds. I like this. You know, he can hit some really big turns. Obviously the king gives him the nuts, and then some diamonds give him a lot of playability. But you'd hate to bet and get raised off of this equity. And you don't really want to start multi-street barreling with a hand like this that doesn't have future blockers like the ace of spades that Nguyen has. So it gets checked around.
As well, he's got the best hand right now. The 5 hits Nguyen.
Obst might decide if nobody wants it, I'll take it right here.
Obst with some experience with a straight flush in this main event. Michael Ruane made one against his full house. He bets $1.5 million.
Nguyen has put aside his baccarat losing for his biggest poker payday ever.
With bottom pair. And the hat. And a lot of chips. That's a raise to $3.5 million. Ruzicka now with a suited ace jack and the draw, and he gets out of the way.
This might be the one straight flush draw I might fold. Day 7 main event. Obst down to 16 big blinds. A call here is for nearly 1/3 of his stack.
He puts in $2 million more.
Well,
The 5 of clubs rolls off on the turn, and there's 3.4 million in the pot. James Obst with 8 million in his hand has a gut shot and a 9-high flush draw. This is a quintessential semi-bluffing hand, and he decides to do just that, leading out 1.5 million. Now, Nguyen takes an interesting line and decides to raise his ace of spades 5. I think that he has kind of the right idea. This is a hand that could be the best hand against draws, and it blocks the turn pair, which works in a couple of ways. It makes it less likely that either of his opponents turn 2 pair are set, but it also duplicates his value range. What I mean by that is, now this is an advanced concept that's actually not that important for 99% of you watching, but I'll explain it nonetheless. A lot of the hands he would raise for value here on the turn, at least the most nutted hands, would be hands like 5-5 or 6-5. And so holding that 5 blocker makes it less likely that your opponent has a 5, so you block some of their value, but also they're going to use a 5 to call you down because their 5 would block a lot of your value hands. So it's a really good blocker to have. The ace of spades is useful as well. My only kind of concern or critique here is that, again, this is a really dynamic board, and you do need to raise the bar, raise your threshold for what hand is high quality enough to bluff here. Now, Nguyen might have made a read that Obst was weak here, and then this becomes a really good raise. I'm not gonna fault him for the play. I think it's a reasonable raise, and this deep in the main event, it is really a game of chicken in a lot of senses. It is about knowing your opponent, playing the individual spot and not theoretically optimal poker. It gets back to James, who, with all of this equity, decides to call, leaving himself not that much behind. Now, this call is relatively standard. I don't think he should expect a lot of fold equity if he jams. He also would hate to jam and get called by like ace-5 of spades or even just a nut flush draw or king-high flush draw that has no pair because, I mean, he's drawing very, very slim. But he has enough equity to call against all the mate hands that Nguyen is repping.
The 5 of spades, and Obst rivers his flush, not a straight flush. Nguyen with trip 5s.
Well, the gamble pays off. Obst should have at least 30 bigs at the end of this action.
Obst checks it over to Nguyen.
And Nguyen definitely will bet here. Trip 5s feels like a monster the way this hand played.
The 5 of spades river improves both of their hands. James obviously rivers the flush, and Nguyen rivers trip 5s with the ace kicker. Now, James has a decision to make first act. The pot is over 10 million. He's got less than 5 million in his stack. Should he just open rip, thinking that he's up against some 2-pair hands that did not improve to a full house, maybe some hands like king-king that were tricky on the flop, or ace-queen that were tricky on the flop but decided they were good on the turn? Can he seek value here, or should he just check? I think it's a close decision. I think the checking makes a lot of sense because the 5 on the river actually makes it less likely that Nguyen was value raising the turn just by a little bit. It reduces the combos of 6-5 and 5-5 significantly. Whether Nguyen would play a hand like kings or ace-queen this way, I'm not really sure. Usually those hands bet the flop. If he didn't bet the flop, would he have raised the turn? I don't know. But I think it makes sense to check this river, try to induce a bluff and or figure it out, which is what I know James is going to try to do, because the fact that we're reviewing this video means that a bet is coming. So let's get to that bet.
We win with almost enough to put Obst all in, 4 million.
Actually, originally I thought Obst might shove. Then I figured he was looking to check raise all in, but he hasn't insta-called. Does he really think Nguyen rivered a monster?
I like this bet. It could feel a little bit thin, but it's not really thin. I mean, we can see here that he's beat. James Obst could have just had queen jack. Like, a lot of his range is going to be hands like queen jack, potentially queen 10, king queen, really just queen X. He's going to be repping a lot of queen X when he plays this way. Some misdraws, of course, but I think that the biggest chunk, if you were to visualize Obst's range, I would say half of it plus is going to be a queen, and then extend it a little further if you include queen 10, although that might have just shoved on the turn. But you could expect sets to have shoved on the turn pretty frequently or maybe always. So you're not up against that many full houses. And you will be up against some flushes. But all in all, I do think with this little left in stacks, you can go for value here. So I like this bet from Nguyen. And Obst goes into the tank. And what he's asking himself is, well, A, how often is Nguyen bluffing? And then B, if he's not bluffing, how often do I beat a value bet? Given the way the board ran out, it's actually, he's not putting Nguyen on a lot of trip 5s because a lot of those trip 5 hands fold the turn or maybe hero call the turn, but don't raise the turn. Usually they fold the turn. So he's thinking about flushes. He's thinking about potential bluffs, as I said, and he's thinking about full houses like queen-queen that would have checked the flop, potentially 10-10 that might have checked the flop. It is true that a lot of the value range that I would put Nguyen on here is beating our 9-high flush, which is awkward because, not that much money has gone into the pot in terms of big blinds. and we made a really strong hand on the river. But we do still find ourselves in this spot where we lose to a lot of value. It's not super likely that Nguyen is going to value cut here with a hand like kings, for example. So James is considering all those factors. He has reads on Nguyen from the way they've played thus far, and let's see what he decides to do.
A fold means Obst is the short stack with just 4.5 million, and that's what happens. Wow. Ngyuen will take that pot.
Well, you win some and you lose some. I don't hate this fold from Obst by any means. I talked about it prior. Obst went on to finish 13th for 428,000. And if you had watched the main event, you know that Ngyuen went on to win for $8 million. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown of these two hands. I understand by after watching these, you're ready to go out there and bluff James Obst. All I can say is good luck. See you in the next video.